Sometimes it can be helpful to let other people's mistakes be learning experiences for you. So here are 5 things that I know that I did wrong throughout my studies for the CFA exams. Probably the biggest one was studying with my phone by my side. Everyone's study schedules can look different, but for me it was an even 3 hours every single day. And it was pretty common for me to pick up my phone sometimes for maybe just 2 or 3 minutes, but those minutes add up. Even if I only picked up my phone once an hour during my 3-hour study period, that meant I was using and looking at my phone for a total of at least around 10 minutes a day. 10 minutes a day over a 6-month period of time, and actually I studied for 7 and 8 months for levels 2 and 3, equals 30 total hours spent just looking at my phone screen when I should have been studying. And for a lot of people, that 30 hours could certainly be the difference between passing and failing. So just having your phone by your side could be the difference between not being able to get through this program. Getting distracted this way is bad in one of 2 ways. For me, I always counted up the minutes for which I was distracted during, and I would tack those on to the end of my study schedule. So I usually ended up studying actually 3 hours and 10 minutes or 3 hours and 15 minutes each day. And that just means that I spent an extra 30 hours over the course of the 6-month period that I was studying for each level that I could have spent doing other things like hanging out with my wife, cleaning out my kitchen, getting other things done around the house, much more productive things than the 30 hours I actually spent looking at my phone. The alternative is if you choose not to make up for the hours in which you caught yourself procrastinating, then that time just becomes 30 hours you don't have during your final review process, right? Because you're still going to progress through all the material that you otherwise would have, but it's just going to be 30 hours slower than if you hadn't ever gotten distracted by your phone. And since it was 30 hours slower, you're going to be 30 hours along further in the timeline when you finish the review of the material and you start your final review. I've said it many times before that final review is critical. It's going to be where you get all of your practice exams, practice questions, and formula memorization done. And taking away 30 hours from that very critical period of time will definitely make a big difference in your chances of being able to pass. There's also something to be said here just in general about how much time we all spend looking at our cell phones. Because if just casually looking at your phone for 3 minutes once an hour every day adds up to 30 hours over 6 months or 60 hours a year, imagine how much time it adds up to when you consider the fact that I probably look at my phone an hour or more every single day. The next thing I feel like I did wrong during my CFA studies is not telling enough other people who were involved in my personal life what I was doing all that time. When you're a CFA candidate, you have to skip a ton of family and friends' social events and gatherings, and that's just how it goes. And I wasn't telling too many people what I was doing during that 3-year period in the evenings because of how low the pass rate is. I was worried about failing and then having to answer to my friends and family when they say, "Oh, hey, how'd you do on that test?" Well, not so good. It's not a fun conversation for you or them really, because then they kind of feel awkward. So I didn't want people to know that I was involved in this program because of the high likelihood of not getting through it. My failure to communicate to all these people what I was doing during all that time just meant that they probably felt like I was blowing them off. Not probably, I know a handful of them that just literally felt that way. And that's not ideal. You should probably tell people why you're not spending any time with them anymore. And if you're worried about the same thing I was, but you do communicate to people what you're doing, that could give you all the more motivation you would potentially need to study harder and give yourself the best chance possible of passing. The next one is the most specific to the CFA material and how you study through it. I don't think I reviewed ethics questions correctly. What I did was read through the ethics material in the CFA curriculum. I used the test prep provider Wiley, and Wiley had some practice videos and practice questions, but they did recommend you actually read the CFA content when reviewing ethics, so I did a lot of that. I think I ended up reading through it like 3 times for each level. Now that I've been through all the exams, I know that just reading that stuff over and over is not necessarily the best way to learn the type of information you need to learn to answer a lot of questions correctly in the ethics section on the CFA exams. A better way to learn would have been to practice as many ethics questions as possible, hopefully ones written by the CFA Institute themselves from any level of the exam or any year that those questions were asked. It doesn't matter because the ethics material is the same across all 3 levels. The very difficult ethics questions on the CFA exams are not black and white. And in my opinion, you just cannot effectively prepare for those difficult ethics questions by reading through the very black and white material in the ethics chapters that is presented to you. It's like straightforward information, but then you get these really obscure questions. And with those obscure questions, the CFA Institute, in what they decide is the correct answer for that question, could be applying different ethical principles differently than you personally might in a given scenario, and so it's an imperfect way to study.
Is it ethical for me to keep the money? From Amber. You're the paper's new ethics columnist?
Really, the only way that I think you can drastically improve your scores on the ethics portions of the CFA exams is by grinding through like hundreds and hundreds of ethics practice questions. Because they're so obscure and they can be in the gray area, you're only going to give yourself a high likelihood of answering a lot of those questions right if you've seen almost literally the same questions before. And I'll tell you, for level 3, I studied for ethics maybe more correctly in how I'm describing here. And there were some questions that came up on the level 3 exam that I'd almost seen word for word in my study of all the other ethics questions I had seen over the past 3 years. That's a better way to study. I think you actually have to have literally seen that same question or a very similar version of that question before to give yourself a high probability of answering a lot of them right. The fourth one is going to be true for studying or sitting and working in any capacity, but that was my physical posture at the desk that I sat and the chair that I sat in during all 3 years of studying. The chair I sat in was a gaming chair, and it was really curved across the back and the bottom of it, which was pretty comfortable, but I don't think it was ideal for a spine. And it also made it really difficult to sit upright while looking at a screen or writing on a page, a few feet away from me. And there were so many times where I would catch myself, or my wife would walk in and catch me slumped way over. Literally, like, I know that all that time spent slumped over was not good for my neck or spine. Nowadays, I try to sit in more ergonomic chairs and do a better job at all that type of stuff. I don't have any health issues from it right now, but I could in the future. If you're going to spend 500 hours studying every year for the next 3 or 4 years, you want to be like situating your posture and your body properly so that you don't run into any health issues with your muscular or skeletal system down the line. And finally, this one was a little bit good and bad, but I kind of weigh that it was more bad than good. And that was feeding off the fear of failure and my desire to study more and pass. It would have been better to kind of enjoy the process of learning as I was going through the material. And I've talked with people since I've passed all the exams who are now studying for the exams, and they get a lot of enjoyment out of the certain sections that they're going through, or just kind of being happy in general to be learning some pretty advanced finance information. And I noticed that in myself a couple times during the 3 years of studies, but it was not all that common. Typically, I really didn't like studying, and I was just doing it because I really didn't want to fail. That led to me waking up in the middle of the night from time to time or having dreams about failing, nightmares about failing. And though I didn't really feel stressed during those times, I'm not a very stressful person in general, so I don't think I would have experienced the stress that way. I feel like my mind subconsciously was still stressed because of how much I thought about not failing, and obviously that manifested itself in those dreams. I say good and bad because I did pass all the exams. I ended up studying enough to pass them all, so I'm glad that maybe this fear of failure was part of the motivation in doing that. But ideally, you could have done that just while having more fun and maybe experiencing a little bit less stress. If you've gotten to this point in the video, I very much appreciate that. The YouTube algorithm loves the long watch times in terms of total minutes watched, but also a percentage of the video watched. If you could also like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, both of those things help me out too. Check out some of the links in my description down below if you want to support me. And as always, thanks for watching.